Welcome back to Banana de 1711 podcast. This is your host, Mark, coming to you with another episode today. Hi, Matias. How are you doing today?
Um, I'm doing fine. I'm doing great. So that's it.
Perfect. So today, this is, a long time in the coming here because I be in conversation with our guest to to have it on the podcast here in our channel. And finally, we got to sit down to talk about all things related to his work, along with Heiser's work. And we're doing this as a tribute because it's just drawing closer the anniversary of his passing on February 23rd. He is 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, since his passing. So I thought, it would be a good idea to have Derek Gilbert because he goes long way back with Heiser. As I was saying off camera, he is the guy because I got to see that interview, which was really a watershed moment. So, Derek Gilbert, thank you for being here and thank you for accepting our invitation. It's an honor to have you on.
Well, and the honor is mine. And, Mike has had such a powerful influence on Sharon and me. I am not ashamed to say that there are three men in particular who changed the course of our lives, Sharon's and mine, from I was an old radio announcer back in the day and left that business because it's very unstable. Wound up in sales for many years, selling steel pipe, structural steel. And then we stumbled onto the work of Mike back around the fall of 2004 when Sharon and I were living in St. Louis or just outside St. Louis. And it was through a mutual friend who had cited some of his work. And so I looked up Mike's website and saw some of his writings and his teachings. And he was in the early stages of writing the first draft of what became his book, The Unseen Realm, which is really his magnum opus. And so, Sharon and I, come spring of 2005, I was trying to, was not quite fulfilled in the job that I had at the time. Was looking for a way to use my radio background for something. Sharon and I had started writing some novels. In fact, Sharon finally in 2026 is going to bring out a couple of the novels that were produced back in the early 2000s. It's part of a new series. She's got the series now with 8 novels in it, the Red Wing Saga. But coming very soon will be the Laodicea Chronicles.
That's a milestone right there.
Yeah. And Mike's research really influenced us. And so we figured out how to podcast. We started our podcast, PID Radio.
PID Radio, yeah.
Which stands for Peering into Darkness, back in March of 2005. So we're coming about our 21st anniversary. And I think, and this isn't exaggerating, but I think we've got the longest running, continuously produced podcast on the internet. Ooh. I'm not sure because I can't go back and check to see who might have been around back in 2005, but to show you how strange it was, our podcast early on in the 2005, 2006, we were outperforming podcasts from major broadcast networks.
Yes. Yeah.
And now that's not the case, but that's all right. We figure whoever needs to hear it will hear it. But Mike was very gracious. Early on, we reached out to him back in the fall of 2005. Along with Tom Horn and L.A. Marzulli. And I would say those three guys, Tom, L.A., and Mike, changed the course of our lives because Mike's research into the divine counsel really changed the way we view the Bible. It opened up the Bible to seeing the world the way the prophets and the apostles did. So that was, we formed a friendship. I mean, we appreciated Mike's sense of humor, and I think he liked ours. He agreed to go to Israel with us in 2018.
I know,
Mike and Drina Heiser. And I'll tell you what, if you want to talk about being nervous, we were at a park on one of the slopes, the foothills of Mount Hermon.
Mount Hermon, yeah.
And Mike gave a teaching there about 5 minutes. And, we had our whole group, about 100 people in our tour group. And then Mike said, okay, well, now, Derek, do you want to say something? I'm like, homina, 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 homina. How do I follow Mike Heiser on Mount Hermon? I mean, what am I going to say? But that was, so, I mean, we also heard Mike's phenomenal teaching on baptism and why we baptize at the Jordan River. And again, of course, that's a reference to 1 Peter 3, beginning at about
Yeah.
verse 18, where it's really a declaration of victory. When Peter comparing it to Noah and the ark and coming through the flood safely, but also comparing it to, connecting it to Jesus' descent into the netherworld. And like, oh, so that's why we baptize. It's representation of going into the abyss and then coming out again, and a declaration of victory over those fallen entities that are still in the abyss. Boy, that's in the old studio. That must have been around 2015, because I was still wearing my fat clothes. After Sharon and I moved here back in 2015, we realized we needed to get healthy. And so she dropped literally half her body weight. I dropped about 40 pounds and I've kept it off. But yeah, Mike was a fairly regular guest on Skywatch TV, which is the ministry that Sharon and I joined back in 2015. Tom loved Mike, Tom Horn. He, in fact, well, yeah, you can see Sharon there. This is, again, before we began our weight loss journey. Tom wanted to hire Mike as an in-house theologian for Skywatch TV. But Mike was working with Logos Bible Software, and then he went down to Florida and started the Awakening School of Theology. And that is still continuing through the Dr. Michael S. Heiser Foundation. So it was an honor to call Mike our friend, and for him to count us among his friends. And the fact that he was willing to associate with people like Sharon and me. Neither of us have degrees. We are not credentialed theologians, but we've both got pretty good reading comprehension. And so we can absorb what we read. And then thankfully, the Lord has given us an ability to share it via the spoken word and the written word. And, you know, God bless him. Mike would share things with us that he found that he thought we might find interesting, bits of research, and we did the same. And it was, what can I say? I mean, his work is foundational to, that's 2016, because that's me without the beard there.
Yeah.
Is foundational to what we've done. Basically, everything that we've done and the books that we've written since coming to the Ozarks here to partner with Skywatch TV back in 2015, is based on the work that Mike produced, the Divine Counsel concept. We maybe taken it in some directions that he would not. We apply it to eschatology, end times studies, and Mike was very cautious when it came to talking about the book of Revelation and end times prophecy. But that was Mike as a careful scholar. He didn't take the biblical text where it didn't go. Sharon and I, we can speculate on some things, and Mike in his fiction work, The Facade and the Portent, did speculate on some things, but he left a lot of that speculation stuff to us non-credentialed scholars. But he has so affected so many people, and he helped people get excited about the Bible again. And if there's one thing that we can take from Mike's work and the torches that he lit for us, is that we can, pass along that flame, that fire to others, to get excited about the Bible, because there are so many things in Scripture that, I mean, that's why our 2023 book was titled Giants, Gods, and Dragons, because in the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, refers to these other entities as giants, as gods, as dragons. And we in the Western Church have so desupernaturalized the Bible that we tend not to see these entities as literal beings anymore, but just as figures of speech representing evil. God wasn't really talking about Leviathan as a seven-headed dragon. Well, but he does. The prophets do. We see Job describing him that way. We see Isaiah describing him that way. So why? And in fact, the seraphim that Isaiah saw in Isaiah chapter 6, when you compare the seraphim and the nachashim and the fact that those words are used interchangeably in Numbers 21 and Isaiah 14 and Isaiah 30, you get the idea that there are some serpentine creatures in God's creation in the unseen realm. Call them seraphim, call them dragons like Satan in the book of Revelation. It's the unseen realm is a lot more exciting. The Bible is a lot more interesting than most of us were taught in church growing up. And again, we maybe get a little more speculative on some things than Mike did in his work, but we try to honor Mike's legacy by not taking Scripture beyond where it goes. And when we speculate, we will say so. Okay, the Bible doesn't say this explicitly, but it could be that, the evidence points toward this. And again, if we can just help other people to get excited about the Bible and the fact that these things are real, it makes the mission of Jesus that much more powerful. What he accomplished for us on the cross and the resurrection on the third day. He was literally going to war for us against these fallen entities. And that's powerful. If we de-supernaturalize the Bible and just make Jesus some sort of life coach, well, there are plenty of those out there. And you look on the internet, you're sure to find one who's going to fit your preferences. But none of them went to war against the fallen realm and these fallen entities like Jesus did for us. So hopefully that's what we can take from Mike's work and pass along to another generation. And you never know. I mean, what you guys are doing with your podcast here, maybe reaching people and touching people and igniting people in the same way. We never know how what we do is going to be that spark that lights that next fire.
Yeah, Mike gave us permission from an academic to get excited about the Bible.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. He really did. It's you start reading these things and suddenly things in the Old Testament that are troubling begin to make sense. Why did God command Joshua to totally annihilate the Amorite cities? Well, I mean, if you read Leviticus 18, you get a really good idea of why. That's a chapter, by the way, if you're watching this. Don't read it out loud with children in the room. Because the Amorites were doing really detestable things, including the sacrifice of their own children to the god Molech. If you don't approach those chapters in the Old Testament where in the book of Joshua, the phrase devoted to destruction, or harem, where they're supposed to be completely wiped out, it's because they were doing these detestable things in the service of these unseen fallen entities like Molech or Baal, just for scholars out there, just so you know, I know how to say it. Most of us Americans say Baal, but it's, Baal.
Baal, yeah.
Astarte, a Chemosh. These are real fallen entities. Whether they're demons or fallen angels, don't know for sure. We'll know someday when we're in that new kingdom, but for now, all we can do is look at the biblical text. But if God treats them as real, and we see that they are under a death sentence per Psalm 82, which is the chapter in the Bible that changed the whole trajectory of Mike's career as a biblical scholar.
Yep.
Then if you don't approach with that understanding, then all of those things that, what about those poor Canaanite children that Joshua and the Israelites killed? Isn't that terrible? The God that I worship would never do that. It's like, well, okay, I'm sorry that God doesn't live up to your standards, but this was Joshua and the Israelites acting as God's instrument of judgment on a people that were so corrupt they were practically irredeemable, which is why they were harem, devoted to destruction. So Mike's research helps make sense of those difficult to understand parts of the Old Testament. And as I said, when you take that in context with Jesus' mission, then it makes his mission, his warfare on our behalf that much more powerful.
I just want to say this. Me personally, before coming across that famous interview that you did with Mike, I previously, because I came to a point in life where I wanted to know the truth, but sometimes the church context doesn't help a lot because of many things. I'm not trying to poo-poo, the church itself. I think it serves a great purpose in our society. I also believe God works through the church, through us. But sometimes, people they don't want to do the hard work. They just want to go, on Sunday morning,
Getting the comfortable answers.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So my first encounter was with Gary Stearman and Prophecy Watchers.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first, and then I got to know about L.A. Marzulli, Ken Johnson, and I remember Dr. Thomas Horn was being interviewed by Gary Stearman, and I was hooked from the get-go.
Tom and
And
Gary
then-
are very close friends, and we love Gary.
Yeah, I
Stearman.
know. Yeah, I know. And I remember also, and then I remember the first time that I saw that interview. By the way, I have the whole. I think it is almost 5 hours. It's a complete video with all the interviews. I have that all of those interviews here in my personal computer, and I watch it very often because it's very, it's a testimonial what Mike and you guys did. So the first time that I saw that interview, Derek, I was like, okay, this guy is nuts. Because I'm paying. I mean, you were throwing the questions. You were doing your your host thing. And then the guy started to talk about Psalm 82, Ugaritic material, the Amorite, the Hermon. Oh, whoa. Hold on. What's going on here? Because last time I checked on my Sunday morning preaching, I just didn't. I never, to that point, I have never listened that kind of talk coming from the Bible. And when I saw, the title, that this was an academic guy. He was not just some flunky guy, making stuff up. He was like serious. And so what I did instantaneously, I stopped watching because I thought the guy was being heretic. I'm not kidding. And then something, I don't know how to explain this, Derek, Matias, but something pulled me back, like, okay, go back. And my human curiosity, tricked me to go and return and rewatch the whole thing. And I just went through all the way to it. And it was like a lot of things going on in my head, and like I said, maybe it's too trivial to say it, but it was life changing. It was paradigm shifting. And you said it, Derek. I remember. It doesn't affect the Bible, but it changed the way. I mean, the narrative, the epic of the Bible, it gives a new perspective to it.
Yeah,
which we didn't have. We didn't have it.
And there are some people who really reject this new paradigm because it's uncomfortable. They're used to seeing the Bible in a certain way, and they don't want to consider the possibility that there are more entities in the spirit realm than God and perhaps Satan. And okay, the Bible mentions Michael and Gabriel, so we can allow them as well. And yeah, okay, there's the third of the stars that get swept down by the tail of Satan, so we got some other fallen angels in there. And yeah, there were some demons that got cast out by Jesus and the apostles, but they probably aren't around us anymore, even though the Bible doesn't say that the demons were destroyed at the end of the apostolic age. But the logic there seems rather convenient. If you're going to say, no, we've got this little box here and we've got everything in there that we want in the box, that we will accept in the box. So, well, okay, look, you accept Satan is an entity, literal entity, because the Bible, refers to him as such. Jesus has conversations with him. God has conversations with him in Job and in Zechariah. We've got these demons that are cast out. Even Jesus confronts the demons. Demons will respond to him. Our name is Legion, for we are many. That sort of thing. Why then is it so difficult to accept that the gods are real? I mean, you call them fallen angels if that's more comfortable for you. These fallen angels were worshipped by the pagans around ancient Israel, or perhaps they're demons, because Paul literally refers to the idols worshipped by the pagans as demons.
Yes.
And warns against people following doctrines of demons. He's not speaking metaphorically. So people, are willing to accept those things, and yet somehow they have this box, and they will not allow the idea of small g gods into that box, even though it's just another word for the entities that they've already accepted are in that box.
Yeah.
There's only one God. Yes, there's one capital G God. There is one Yahweh. There are many small e Elohim that are mentioned in the Old Testament. There's only one capital E Elohim. It's like saying there are many Americans, but only one American is the president. It's no different. There are many Elohim, but only one who pre-existed all things, spoke all things into existence, created all things. And apparently he created these entities in the unseen realm with the same kind of free will that we humans have.
Yeah.
And just like us, many of these entities chose badly. Now, the demons, that's a subject that is still considered controversial, even though in the early church it was not. Doug Van Dorn.
Yeah.
Doug Van Dorn wrote about this in Giants, Sons of the Gods, and I have to cite him because it was that book and some of the research in that book that led me to reading some of the things I should have been reading in my research anyway about the beliefs of the early church fathers. And there's a wonderful academic paper. It was a doctoral dissertation by a scholar named Jaap Dodens. Yeah, about Genesis 6 and the sons of God. And when you look at the research that he did, you look at the research that Mike did for the unseen realm and reversing Hermon, and then when you look at what the early church fathers believed, it's clear that up until the 5th century, the early 5th century, in the time of Augustine, it was just accepted as Christianity 101. I mean, this is like base level Christianity. Oh yeah, demons are the spirits of those giants that were destroyed in the flood of Noah. That was also Jewish understanding until the 2nd century, when they started to de-supernaturalize the Old Testament, the Tanakh and the Torah, to try to keep Jews who had not already accepted Jesus as Messiah from following the early Jews, which made up the early church. After the Bar Kokhba rebellion around the year 132 to 135 AD, that's when rabbinic thought redefined the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 to human rulers or human judges. And it's ironic because as Christians split from Judaism after the 2nd century, it was Christian theologians like Julius Africanus and then Augustine who followed what the rabbis had been teaching since the 2nd century and saying, no, those sons of God in Genesis 6, those are the righteous sons of Seth. Again, logically, it makes no sense, and it is not what the early church believed or taught. So this whole idea of the sons of God, angelic beings, literally commingling with human women and creating these mutant giants called Nephilim, and then upon their death, the spirits of the Nephilim becoming demonic spirits referred to in the Old Testament as Rephaim, once you get past the book of Deuteronomy. Again, that was standard Christian theology until the time of Augustine. So we're just trying to get back to the way, again, I'll say it again, we're just trying to return to the way that the apostles and the prophets saw the world around them and understood the scriptures. And that's all that Mike was trying to do.
That's true. And also, I'm going to return a little bit about personal testimony. about how I met Mike, because it's going to connect with what you just mentioned. My first degree is in astronomy, a bachelor's degree, and I always like it, science. And the thing is, I like it a lot. Stories about ufology, UFOs, and alien encounters. The thing is that I'm still part of the. I go to the Anglican Church, but I was raised in the Pentecostal tradition. But I'm not. I'm not cessationist. I don't find any reason to believe that the gifts of the Spirit are racist. Thing is that in the Latin America, in the Pentecostal tradition, charismatic tradition, it's normal to hear stories about miracles and supernatural stuff. It's normal in Latin America. It's the standard. Demonic possession, people get free. People get healed from cancer or some incurable illness. There are prophetic dreams. That's something that people live with. So that's why believing in the supernatural was never an issue to me. I always found weird that when someone say in church, I had a prophetic dream about something that will happen, and it happened. And everybody will say, oh yeah, the Lord revealed to you. Or I had a vision of an angel, of Jesus appeared to me. And it was like, okay, no problem. Yeah, that could happen. No problem. Then if you take a person and that person said, I was in my room and I couldn't move and I saw a gray being with black eyes coming to me, and they took me from the room and they put me in an operating table. All the people in the church are going to say, go to the psychologist, go to psychiatrist, you go to a doctor. And I always thought that's literally the same kind of evidence. It's testimony about a paranormal encounter. Why are you so willing to accept one event and then reject the other, which is literally based on the same kind of evidence?
Yeah.
And the thing is that in church, I say, well, there are people who say they have been abducted by aliens. And I said, yeah, that never happened. That's just people get crazy. Why is that? And then I was researching ancient aliens, and then I found that document, Ancient Aliens Debunk. And you know that document. Yeah. And Stephen White, I think the name of the
Chris White.
Chris White. Amazing documentary. The thing is that every time that they were talking about Ancient Aliens season one, and how the people like the guy who wrote Chariots of the Gods and
Eric Von
Däniken and Zacharias Sitchin, that's weird academic that appeared in the clips that he was literally quoting the text that Eric Von Däniken was quoting, and he showed that those texts were not saying that. Who is that guy? Michael Heiser. Interesting. Why is it? And say, oh yeah, he must be a scholar who wants to show that all these things are nonsense. And then he say, yeah, you have to be like a Berean. You have to read the text for yourself. And I say, this guy is a Christian? That's weird, because he's like doing heavy research stuff, and yet he's a believer. And I was a believer, so but I found weird that someone will go to those places. And Heiser was literally taking seriously people who were saying about supernatural stuff or alien encounters, and he was doing research and showing why the ancient alien hypothesis was not real, not sustained by the scriptural evidence. And so the thing is, they go like, wow, someone is actually going to places in which I know that nobody in the church want to go, because he said, you cannot be inconsistent. If you believe that this is supernatural in that area, and then you deny the paranormal in another area, on the same grounds, on the same evidence, people outside the church are going to say you are inconsistent, and it's true. But Mike was not afraid to go there. So it's I wanted to connect that to your work on that area, that you have read things related to UFOs and alien encounters.
Yeah, we were blessed to be sent by Tom Horn to Roswell in 2017 for the annual Roswell UFO Festival. That was the 70th anniversary. of the famous crash back in 1947. And Mike was there to give a presentation. And his presentation was, I found very interesting because I've been a science fiction fan since very young. Learned at a very early age how to lift one eyebrow because Mr. Spock did that on Star Trek. Mike talked about science fiction being used as an evangelizing tool for the ancient aliens gospel. And he's right. In fact, I included a chapter about that in the recent book, Destination Earth, that I co-authored with Donna Howell and Allie Anderson. It's been a tool since the 1950s, really, here in the United States. Science fiction has been used to present the alien gospel, if you will. But so we've been programmed over the last 75 or 80 years to expect alien contact. And as we're recording this now, we're approaching a very interesting year. Last fall, we had the congressional hearings in the United States on the what the government knows and when it knew it about the UFO phenomenon. There are claims by some that we've recovered biologicals from crashes and so forth, but nobody's ever presented them as evidence. It's always a guy told me that we did this thing, so it's a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. But people are inclined to believe it, and there are a lot of surveys that show. And again, this is something that was included in the book Destination Earth, that back in 2012, as the National Geographic Channel here in the U.S. was getting ready to launch a UFO chasing show to compete with ancient aliens, they commissioned a study and found that about 36% of American adults believe that we've been contacted by ET. And compare that with the recent surveys by George Barna of Arizona Christian University, who's been surveying American Christians about what we believe for more than 20 years now. And he found, when I first started tracking George Barna's work back in 2017, as part of the, we were getting ready to go to Roswell, he found that only 9% of American adults have a biblical worldview, which he defined as holding to 6 key points of Christian doctrine, including believing in the virgin birth of Jesus, his literal resurrection from the dead, believing that Satan is a literal entity and not a force or a symbol, believing that we cannot earn our way into heaven, things like that, things that should be Christianity 101. Only 9% of Americans have that kind of worldview, and only 19% of people who claim to be born-again Christians. But since 2017, it's fallen to just 4%. So 4% of American adults have a biblical worldview, and more than 1 out of 3 believe we're being contacted by extraterrestrials. So this is where, a lot of people would look at Mike and think, boy, he's really weird. He's a biblical scholar, and yet he's also into this ufology stuff. No, Mike understood that the UFO phenomenon and this, what he and L.A. Marzulli have been calling for a long time, the alien gospel or the ET gospel, is a worldview that claims to offer answers to the 3 big questions that all of us humans have been trying to answer since the beginning of creation. Why are we here? Where did we come from? And what happens when we die? And we saw that when we were in Roswell back in 2017. We didn't see any churches there that were witnessing to the people who'd come there, but there were a lot of tarot card readers and palm readers and people selling healing crystals and things like that. People were there looking for spiritual guidance. And Mike understood that. And he also recognized that men like Eric von Daniken, author of Chariots of the Gods, Zecharia Sitchin, author of The 12th Planet, this idea that planet Nibiru, comes through the solar system every, I forget how many, 25,600 years or something like that. And that the ancient Sumerian gods were just ancient aliens. Mike understood the appeal to people is that these beliefs offered answers that didn't require any admission of guilt for sin didn't require repentance. It's a salvation without God. And so this is why people are looking to this. And as we come into 2016 now, come this summer in June, you've got the new Steven Spielberg movie coming out about the UFO phenomenon. The trailer is vague enough that it doesn't really reveal or tip its hand as to what the plot is. But based on his past works like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Taken, there are some things there that suggest that he's got a certain worldview, and I don't think it tracks with a biblical worldview. So we as Christians got to realize there are more people who believe in E.T. than who believe in God as he's revealed himself in Scripture. And Mike was one of the few scholars who was willing to cross that line and approach that community and say, look, you're being programmed through science fiction. These movies, these books, these series are opening you to the idea that these false gods will offer salvation. And a lot of people are buying into it. So
Yeah.
it was quite an honor to be there at the same time as Mike and to see him there in Roswell for that 70th anniversary.
Yeah, he was so what's the expression in English? Far the curve, like
Ahead of the curve?
ahead of the curve.
Yes.
He was in the early 2000s talking about things that now they are becoming a reality. For example, the disclosure movement is led by scientists and military officers in the U.S. Army to reveal the truth. One of the guys of the disclosure movement, Dr. Nolan, he became famous because he was analyzing the mummy, which was found in the Atacama Desert in Chile, which, to my shame as a Chilean, the Chilean scientists didn't do a very good job in, doing research. And he showed that it was basically a human. The thing is that Dr. Nolan started to bring hard science to the topic of disclosure and alien research. And I was watching an interview and he was just doing, oh yes, we did a DNA analysis, but there are also cultural things. And I have been reading this book, Chariots of the Gods by Van Daniken, and I was like, oh my God. So even people in the disclosure movement who are serious scientists, they are applying hard science, and yet their worldview on which they are putting their work, it's totally bogus. It's recycling of Zacharias Sitchin and theosophy and stuff like that.
Right, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I just did a presentation for L.A. Marzulli's virtual conference just a week ago on the UFO deception. And I talked about how the teachings of occultists like Helena Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, and others were filtered through the horror fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, who was an author of Gothic horror about 100 years ago. He died in the 1930s. But he was very influential on other horror authors, horror filmmakers. You can see his influence in films like Alien, in, let's say, The Thing with Kurt Russell. The Alien versus Predator movie that was set in Antarctica is very much influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft influenced some French science fiction authors and editors who put out a book of alternative archaeology, shall we say. The pyramids couldn't have been built by humans. The Nazca lines must have been done by aliens, that sort of thing. Influenced by the fiction of Lovecraft. These fellows were named Powles and Bergier. They influenced Von Daniken, who wrote then Chariots of the Gods. In fact, he borrowed so much of their work that Powles and Bergier threatened legal action. They threatened to sue him. But when you look at this chain of evidence, you see that, and you mentioned this, Matthias, that the modern UFO movement, especially the ancient aliens idea, is essentially just repackaged theosophy. Because Blavatsky, 140 years ago, was claiming that she was hearing from ascended masters somewhere out there in the vicinity of the star Sirius. And you've got that being repackaged by guys like Dr. Stephen Greer, who released a documentary a few years ago called Sirius. And, I watched about 5 minutes of it and saw what direction he was going with it. Oh, ancient aliens. Okay. But Dr. Greer is teaching, and he's one of the leading names in the disclosure movement, claims that we can all be taught to communicate with the aliens who are just circling our planet in their craft, waiting to come down and help us. And this is where we need to separate the UFO phenomenon, because, or UAP, I guess is what they're called now, unidentified aerial phenomena. I want the United States government checking into things in the skies that we can't identify, because they might be coming from Russia or China. That would be a good thing to know. But the contactee and abductee phenomenon is different from this, because it's spiritual. These people, like Dr. Greer, who claim that they're in contact with ET through proper purification and preparation, they can, open themselves up and hear from these entities. They're really describing contact with the spirit realm. It's the same thing that shamans thousands of years ago would do. Go into a dark place, maybe consume some psychotropic substance, and then open themselves up to the spirit realm. Very much like the people who go on these trips down to South America and have a shaman feed them ayahuasca, the drink that makes you hallucinate and see into the spirit realm. It's not a hallucination. It is opening you up to the spirit realm. It is a spiritual phenomenon, and those who don't recognize it as such will be deceived into believing that they are hearing from these extraterrestrials. I just wonder if there are truly sentient beings from other worlds far across the galaxy circling our planet. Why can't they use a webcam to get in touch with us? Why can't they send a signal by, blinking their headlights or something? Why is it? It's always telepathic, which means it's spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
These are interdimensional entities, not extraterrestrial. And again, this is where we as Christians can talk to people in this movement. And this is what Dr. Heiser understood. Mike understood, hey, look, they're speaking our language. We just need to engage with them instead of rejecting it as too weird. L.A. Marzulli, some years ago, there was a very well-known UFO incident around Stephenville, Texas. Many people witnessed it, including credible witnesses like police officers, people who are trained to look and take note of things. And LA got in touch with a number of churches down in that area of Texas, asking, said, look, I will pay my own way to come down and address your congregation and answer any questions they might have about what is going on, because it's not what people think. And not a single church took him up on the offer. So this is another area where Mike Heiser was ahead of the curve, not just in helping to restore the divine counsel worldview in reading the Bible, but also understanding that this is a spiritual phenomenon. The UFO phenomenon is a spiritual phenomenon that is being dressed up with a science fiction coating. So we think, oh no, it's science. It's scientific.
Science. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's spiritual. It's supernatural.
Yeah. You could have a Dr. Nolan given a very good DNA analysis of the Chilean mummy and show that it's actually a human fetus.
Yeah.
And then he started speaking about, the Babylonians talk about the planet Nibiru, and gets the whole thing. Just it's basically, as you say, it's basically a spiritual doctrine dressed as science for a modern audience. And as sorry, Marv, I could you I called you. As you mentioned, Dr. Hugh Ross, he has spoken that every encounter with supposedly alien beings throughout history, every time they talk about where they come from, their astronomy is absolutely stupid. They say that they come from Venus, and Venus is a paradise below the clouds. And then the Soviet Union sent a proof to Venus, and it turns out it was a literal hell. And they say they came from the moon, because in the moon there is an atmosphere, and no, there is no atmosphere. And they came from Mars. Every time, the message is always far away.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
First is
and
in
it
the
keeps
solar
getting
system.
farther as we learn more about the
universe. So, as one simple explanation is that it's just human invention, because that could be an explanation. Because if you were an alien, you will give better astronomy. Another, my going way outside the box, is that actually, if the spiritual entities that rebel against God were basically condemned to be on this planet, on this earth, like saying you want to have dominion over these monkeys, you are going to stay here, you are not going to return to the heavens. They kind of lost any connection. It's kind of like they don't come from the stars, they actually are kind of like trapped here with us. So therefore they don't know really that much outside of what's going on in this solar system. So that's why the astronomy that they say in their supposedly context is always dumb. So it's that's my opinion.
No, I think you're right, and I give Mike a lot of credit for writing the novels, The Portent and The Facade. The Facade being the first of the two, using the same characters, and he addresses the UFO phenomenon and the contactee abductee phenomenon. And he does get into some speculation about the nature of alien grays. What are they? It's been a long time since I've read the book, and I really need to go back and read it. But for those who are interested in Mike's work, I recommend it because the lead character named Brian, is actually Mike. Mike was writing Mike in the story. It is really interesting when he gets into book 2, and some of the people involved begin to encounter face to face some of these fallen angelic entities. I won't give away any spoilers, but it's he was really unique in that not only did he approach the UFO phenomenon as something that needed to be addressed and confronted by Christians, because it was promoting a bad theology. People believing that the gods of the Sumerians, they came from planet Nibiru. No, Nibiru is mentioned in some Sumerian texts, but it deals with the planet Jupiter. It's not this mysterious planet that only comes around every every tens of thousands of years. And I also find it interesting that the main religious city in Mesopotamia for many, many thousands of years was the city of Nippur, which was the home city of the chief god, the father god of the Mesopotamians, called Enlil. And it was believed that every year the other gods of Mesopotamia would come from their sacred cities to Nippur and meet and decree the fates of the land for the coming year. Interesting, because Nippur can also be transliterated into English as Nibru, which is very close to Nibiru. So yeah, it's a place where all the gods would meet, but it's the temple of Enlil. It's not this mysterious planet out there in space. What's even more interesting is that when you consider Ezekiel 1 and his encounter with the wheels within wheels and the living creatures around the throne, this is always pointed to by the ancient aliens guys like Giorgio Tsoukalos as evidence that there are UFOs in the Bible. No, the iconography, the imagery that Ezekiel described was the imagery of a Mesopotamian king. And everybody would have known that in the 6th century BC when they were reading it. As we're reading backwards into a 21st century science fiction influenced worldview into Ezekiel 1. But what's really interesting, and I credit Sharon for pointing this out, she loves, as we go through our weekly Bible study, why there, why then, and, who benefits, that kind of thing. Ezekiel mentions that he had his vision of this throne room, which is the throne room of God, at the Kivar Canal, Chebar in English, Kivar Canal. And he mentions it like 7 more times. The vision I had at the first by the Kivar Canal, When I had the vision by the Kivar, why does he keep mentioning it? Well, maybe it's important. So we looked up the Kivar Canal. Where is it? It's a canal that ran right through the city of Nippur next to the temple of Enlil. In other words, Ezekiel had this vision of God's throne appearing in the sky directly over the temple of the chief god of Mesopotamia at Nippur or Nibru. If there had been a microphone to drop in the 6th century BC, that would have been the time to do it. It's like God appearing over the temple of the chief god of Mesopotamia and saying, okay, Ezekiel, here's what's going to happen through the rest of history. And, oh, yes, you down there, you're still dead. But the UFO guys don't want to look any farther than like, oh, it sounds weird. It's a round thing. It must be a UFO.
Yeah. That's one thing I want to mention, that in your work, I've been fascinated how you connect, as you said, in the Bible, it's not just important what happened, but where it happened.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was fascinated and listening to your presentation, and you mentioned that detail about the Kivar Canal, and also all the places that Jesus visited, all the places related to in the Gospels and also in Acts, and how the locations, they are telling their own story that reinforce or clarifies what the main story in the text is saying. And it's just fascinating how cosmic geography is so important in the biblical story. And most churchgoers, they have no idea because they...
Well, again, that's one of the things that Mike talked about, the idea of sacred geography, the fact that Israel belonged to Yahweh, belonged to God. There's one of the Psalms where David is lamenting the fact that he's been driven out by Saul and that he might have to live amongst foreigners where he would no longer be in contact with Yahweh because he'd be living in a land that belonged to another deity. I mean, if he went to Ammon, it would be Milcom or Molech. If he went to Moab, it would be the land of Chemosh. Edom belonged to a god called Kaus. It's not mentioned in the Bible, but every nation had its own supreme deity. For the Canaanites and Amorites, it was Baal. And, David was lamenting this fact. We also see it in the story of the servant of the king of Aram, the Syrian king, Naaman, who's got leprosy. And so he comes to the northern kingdom of Israel to find the prophet Elisha, who might heal him. And Elisha tells him, just go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. And Naaman was like disappointed. He thought there was more to it than that. But his servant convinces him, he does it, he washes, he's healed. And then he takes a couple of donkey loads of dirt back with him to Damascus and said, I want to worship Yahweh because I know now that he is the true God. Baal couldn't heal me. Yahweh healed me. I want to be in connection to this holy ground. This is sacred. Forgive me when I have to follow my master into the temple of Baal, but I'm going to have this dirt with me. So this was the idea that they had back then. Sacred ground. This continued down to the time of Jesus, and this is one of the things we wrote in our book, our most recent book, The Gates of Hell. Why did Jesus take his disciples to Caesarea Philippi to ask them the question, who do you say I am? In the modern world, we don't have this idea of geography and think, okay, they went to this place and Jesus did this thing. Okay, what's the big deal? Jesus' base of ministry at the time was in Capernaum, which is on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Caesarea Philippi is 30 miles away at the base of Mount Hermon. Now today, that's, a day trip. We hop in the car, we go to the outlet mall, go shopping, whatever. It's no big deal. But back then they had to walk. And that's a 14-hour hike. 14 hours of walking across, and we've been there several times now. The land between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon is very hilly. You've got mountains that go, 600-700 meters, and then back down again. And these guys are walking this in sandals, 14 hours, probably a 2-day march, just so he can take them to this pagan cult center which for observant religious Jews must have been, like, why are we here? I mean, this is, there's a temple to Jupiter over here. There's a temple to the emperor over here. There's all these pagan cult things, the grotto of Pan over here. And Jesus went them there to ask very specific questions. And that's where he said, on this rock, I will build my church. Well, he's standing in front of a 9,200 foot mountain. That's about a 3,000 meter mountain. That was, to the Canaanites, it was essentially their version of Mount Olympus. And Jesus went there to declare his divinity to his followers. When Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for this has not been revealed to you but by flesh and blood, but by my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, you are Petros, wordplay, and on this rock, this Petra, I will build my church, my congregation. So this Mount Olympus behind me, I will build my congregation, and the gates of hell, which is this really big cave right over here,
Right away.
will not prevail against it.
Yeah.
And in the first century, everyone knew that cave was the entrance to the netherworld. Jesus didn't say, hey, this is not how the supernatural works. This is not really a portal to the netherworld. And the gods of Canaan don't really meet on the top of this mountain. He could have saved them 14 hours of hiking in their sandals if they had just done it back at Capernaum. Or why not do it at Jerusalem, where the religious authorities were? No, he did it there because that was enemy territory. That was ground that belonged to the fallen realm. The region of Bashan, the kingdom of Og, which was the first military objective of Moses and the Israelites, is so covered with megalithic monuments to the cult of the dead, from Gilgal Rephaim, which is so big you can see it on Google Earth. You can see it from space, basically. And this giant serpent-shaped ridge that's a quarter-mile away that's covered with megalithic tombs on top of it. And then you get smaller monuments called dolmens. They found something like 5,600 of them in the ancient kingdom of Og. So it was essentially a giant necropolis. And even from Canaanite texts, we know that was where the Rephaim were buried. That belonged to the realm of the dead. That was literally the entrance to Canaanite hell. And Jesus walked all the way through it up to Mount Hermon, and then 6 days later, according to the Gospel of Matthew, climbed a very high mountain, which could only be Mount Hermon, because that's the only high mountain close to Caesarea Philippi, and was transfigured. I mean, he was sending a message into the spirit realm. He declared his divinity at the base of the mountain to his followers and to the fallen realm in the unseen realm at the top of Mount Hermon. And then from there, he went to Jerusalem to fulfill his mission. Cosmic geography. It matters.
You remember Heiser, the way he put it. He went there to pick a fight.
He went there to pick a fight. Yeah, he
poked
him in the eye.
In the eye. That's the phrase. He poked him in the eye. Derek, I want to just get us back on track here from Genesis, because your first book that I remember, it's not your first book chronologically, but the first book that I remember right after you have the interview with Mike was this book, The Great Inception.
Yeah.
And talk about the Nahash. That's why I was putting that video over there, because I just want to know if you still keep the same your same views on this, or have you come across any new evidence, new perspectives about the Nahash, the shining one? What can you tell us about that?
Pretty much the same. And again, a lot of this comes from Mike with Nakash, and showing how that word implies through its the nuances of Hebrew. One, a being of radiant appearance. And as I mentioned earlier, with the interchangeability in Numbers 21 especially of Nakash and Seraph, or Nakashim Seraphim, translated into English usually as flying fiery serpents. Which again, if you're going to use an English phrase or an English word to describe a flying fiery serpent, it would have to be dragon. The one thing where I've changed my view a little bit is in looking at that entity, the Nakash from Genesis 3, which I'm okay with identifying that entity as Satan. I don't believe that the entity from Genesis 3, the Nakash or Satan, is the rebel described in Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28, the rebel who's tossed out of Eden, because Satan never has any connection in the Old Testament or in any other text with the Rephaim, the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. And we see in Isaiah 14, verse 9, that Sheol is stirred up to greet you or meet you when you come. It rouses the English word in my ESV translation here is shades. It rouses the shades to greet you. But in the Hebrew, it rouses the Rephaim to greet you. And in the Septuagint translation, which is the translation made by Jewish religious scholars around 200 BC, it's clear that they understood that these spirits were the spirits of the giants. Hades below was embittered after meeting you. All the giants who ruled the land, who roused all the kings of the nations from their thrones, rose together with you. There was an understanding by Jewish religious scholars until about the 2nd century AD that giants were the spirits of those, or the Rephaim were the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. Again, Satan is never connected to that event. There's nothing in Genesis chapter 6 that connects Satan to the Nephilim or the Rephaim. But this other entity from Genesis 6, who is identified in the book of 1st Enoch, which Mike has also written about, he's got a 2-volume companion to the book of Enoch, Shemiyaza, he's called, the leader of the rebellion in Genesis chapter 6. He is connected to the Rephaim. And so I argued in my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, that the entity described in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 is Shemiyaza, the leader of the sons of God in Genesis 6, and not Satan. So that is one area where I've changed a little bit, because I know in my early books, The Great Inception, Last Clash of the Titans, I did identify Satan as the rebel described by Isaiah and Ezekiel. I've changed my view on that. I think that this other entity, Shemiyaza, who I then go on in the Last Clash, or rather in the Second Coming of Saturn, to argue is the entity known by the Hebrews as Molech, and who will return from the abyss, from Tartarus, from the bottomless pit, in Revelation 9 as Abaddon or Apollyon. This entity who believes that he was destined to ascend to heaven above the stars of God and to set his throne on high on the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. I think that Shemiyaza, the entity that will come out of the abyss in Revelation 9, that is the one difference in my opinion of the Nakash from Genesis 3. And I know that this is something that is not the majority view. In fact, a friend of ours wrote a book about this about 15 years ago called Deconstructing Lucifer, which is a reference to the Latin translation of the Hebrew of Isaiah 14:12. This entity is named Hillel ben Shachar, or Lightbringer, son of dawn, or day star, son of dawn. Lightbringer in Latin gives you the name Lucifer. David W. Lowe argued that Lucifer is not Satan, which is the view I now hold. And at the time I laughed. I said, oh, come on, David, everybody knows Lucifer is Satan. But when you start looking at the evidence and realize, okay, wait a minute, Satan is never connected, not only with the Nephilim or the Rephaim. In the Old Testament, he's never even connected to the underworld. Mm-hmm. He's never connected to Hades or Sheol. But this other entity, if you read 1st Enoch chapters 1 through 36, the Book of the Watchers, that's where he is now. And according to 2 Peter 2, verse 4, those sons of God from Genesis 6 are in chains in Tartarus. Jude verses 6 and 7 also puts these entities in the bottomless pit in chains until the end of the age. So one of the interesting bits of information that I think connects all this together, and again, this entity, Shemiyaza, who I identify as Molech of the Hebrews, El of the Canaanites, Enlil of the Babylonians, Elil of the Akkadians. There was a scholar named William Gallagher who about 30 years ago wrote a paper where he looked at the etymology of the Hebrew name Halel ben Shachar from Isaiah 14:12, translated by the King James as Lucifer, son of dawn, the ESV, day star, son of dawn. He showed that Halel was actually the West Semitic or Hebrew transliteration of the Akkadian name Elil or Enlil. So in other words, this was a condemnation of the chief god of Mesopotamia, who was worshipped as the father of all of their gods, whose temple was at Nippur or Nibru, and is now in the abyss, in the bottomless pit. This research came out of just an idea. It's like, look, if this rebellion in Genesis chapter 6 is so important, which, again, prompted Mike Heiser to write the book, the Reversing Hermann, and showing that Jesus' mission was to reverse the evil that these fallen sons of God, these watchers, had brought to the world. What happened to Shemaiah? He's mentioned and called out and punished in the book of 1 Enoch, but then he sort of disappears from history. And when I started digging into it, I argued in the book, The Second Coming of Saturn, no, that's not the case. He's there all through the Bible. He was El of the Canaanites. He was Molech, Milcom of the Ammonites. He was Ashur of the Assyrians, Dagon of the Philistines, same entity by different names, and documenting that with secular research. And thankfully, the scribes in the ancient Near East loved to put together god lists, which are sort of like the clay tablet equivalent of Google Translate, where they would, for their kings and ambassadors, their royal officials, they had to know which gods were going to oversee the treaties that they were agreeing to. So they say, okay, for the Hittites, this would be Teshub, and for the Amorites, this would be Hadad, for the Canaanites, this is Baal, that kind of thing. So we know Dagon equals El equals Enlil, who is Elil, who is Kumarbi of the Hurrians and the Hittites, and Kronos of the Greeks, and Saturn of the Romans. We know this from the ancient text. This is not, me trying to invent something here. And when you piece it all together, I think that's who we're looking at in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. This entity who back in Genesis 6 thought that he could take dominion of the earth away from the children of Adam and Eve by beginning this breeding program that created these monstrous hybrid offspring that posed an existential threat to humanity, forcing God to send the flood to cleanse the earth and start over. And then afterwards, we start seeing all of these cultures worshiping entities from the netherworld in places like the Abzu, the abyss in Sumeria, in Sumer, the Abi of the Hurrians and the Hittites, or the Ov of the Hebrews, the witch of Endor, the medium of Endor. Remember the story where she summons the spirit of Samuel and he rises up from the earth. This was common practice, and by the time of Saul and David, it had been going on for at least 2,500 years based on archaeological evidence. And we can trace the people who brought that practice to the land of Canaan, the Hurrians, who came from what is now Armenia in the 5th millennium BC, because they had a very unique style of pottery. Archaeologists can trace their movements. It's brilliant. They emerged from the plain of Ararat. In other words, the lowlands below the mountains where Noah's Ark came to rest. So the descendants of Ham, Shem, and Japheth came down to the lowlands and began worshiping, and with this idea that we need to summon spirits from the netherworld. Where'd that idea come from? Maybe because they knew that the flood had been brought on by these monsters created by the gods who once walked among us, who are now confined to the netherworld. Now again, circumstantial evidence. The Bible doesn't tell us this explicitly, so it's not a theological hill I will die on, but the evidence points in this direction. It's a reasonable conclusion. And this is one of the areas where we took the concepts that we learned from Mike Heiser and tried to apply it and take it further to try to explain some of the strange things in the Bible.
Yeah, it's for example, when Jesus mentioned the lake of fire, he specifically said, made by the devil and his angels.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing in the Old Testament about that. But
Right.
in Enoch,
Yes.
you know that the lake of fire was the place to be the punishment for the rebel stars, the rebel mountains,
Yep.
and the rebel watchers. So so when Jesus talk about the lake of fire, he's not, and who is going to be punished there, he's not making reference to Genesis 3. He's making
Right.
reference to Genesis 6. And so it's another thing that I also, and you mentioned in your work, is the connection with Leviathan. For example, what's the name of the son of Dr. John Walton? I forgot to. Marv, you remember the name of the son of Dr. Walton?
Yes, John Harvey Walton.
John Harvey Walton, yes. I don't know, Derek, if you know the work of the Dr. John Walton, an academic evangelical scholar. He's very good in cosmic geography, mind-blowing. The thing is that John Harvey Walton, he connected that the serpent mentioned in Revelation 9, and the ancient serpent, the devil, etc. John seems to make reference to that ancient serpent in Revelation 12. John seems to is making reference to Isaiah 27, Leviathan. He's connecting the ancient serpent to Leviathan, not to the serpent in Genesis 3.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a connection that people have missed for a long time. But it seems that the story of supernatural rebellion, as Mike showed in his work, Demons, is way, way, way more complicated than we usually learn in Sunday school.
I just want to say this because the way that we talk, I mean, we, as Derek put it earlier in this interview, we both are like influenced by his work. And the thing is this, you, Matthias, you have read and continue to read academic literature. Derek, he devours articles. I'm pretty sure. And I do my homework as well because we love this. We're nerds, if we can put it that way.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's a compliment. But what I want to say is this. I don't know you guys if you have detected this in the academic literature, but the biblical theology developed and laid out by Mike in his work is not something that some other scholars are willing to endorse very easily. And I understand academics, scholars, they're very cautious. They go very slow and they need to analyze all the perspective. That's fine. But the framework laid out in his book, The Unseen Realm, I haven't seen it anywhere else. For example, Derek, do you remember the Bulls of Bashan?
Yeah.
This article written by Robert D. Miller.
Yes, I cite it in almost every book.
Exactly. I know you do. And the thing is this. I haven't seen, I have read through, commentaries on the Book of Psalms, really critical commentaries. And I have yet to find one commentary, scholarly commentary, where they do the connection, they do the reference between the Bulls of Bashan being demonic. They don't do that connection. Why? I don't know. I can't throw my opinion on that. But you guys, Derek and Heiser, they go there. And they see a connection. The other thing that I wanted to say is, you remember the Apkallu, Derek?
Yeah.
Because Mike, and of course, as you said, he was relying on, as he used to say, nothing in my book is original to Mike. You will find a reference in some other place. But the thing is this, I consulted two scholars. I don't know if you have heard about John Day,
Yes.
From Oxford. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other guy was Alan Lindsay. He is an Assyriologist. And I consult them about the connection between the sons of God, the Watchers, and the Apkallu. They both rejected that connection because they said they pretty much. And actually, Alan Lindsay because I cited Amar Anna's famous article on the origins of the Watchers, and he's like, okay, yeah, you need to be very careful because sometimes Omar Anos, he goes out of track. And I was like, okay, thank you. But they are very aseptic about these
Yeah.
connections. And
Skeptic,
I
Well,
just want to show this to you both. Derek, I don't know if you have seen this book, perhaps for any further research or book that you may come up with in the future. But this is the latest, this is the most recent treatment about the Akalo.
okay, I've not seen it. No, I'll have to get a copy
It's
of that.
pricey, as you can tell.
Yeah, academic works usually are.
Yeah. And this is the most recent scholarly treatment about the Akalo, just so you know. Um, and I also need to buy it and to see what they're going. But again, I don't see that connection. Somebody else it's just not there. People they don't do that. Why? I don't know. I don't know.
There's a scholar whose work Sharon and I like a lot. His name is Nicholas Wyatt,
Oh yeah,
who's I think professor emeritus of the University of Edinburgh,
Edinburgh. Yeah, yeah,
and he has written quite a lot on the ancient Near East, and he has accepted Anus's work connecting the Apkallu of Mesopotamia to the Watchers of the Hebrew tradition. Anus also wrote another very important paper dated 1999, so this goes back more than 25 years now, where he showed that the Greeks knew who the Rephaim were, and this was an important. When I read this paper, and I've read it probably 20 times now, because every time I read it, there's something new in there that jumps
yeah.
out at me that I didn't see before. It's very dense, but he argues and shows that the phrase used by the Greek poets Homer and Hesiod, from whom we get a lot of what we know about Greek religion, what we call mythology, the phrase they use for the demigod heroes of old, the half human, half divine, in other words, Nephilim, who walked the earth in pre-flood days when Kronos ruled in heaven. The phrase they use, meropes anthropoi, and as anthropoi, of course, is the Greek word from which we get the word anthropology, the study of humans. Meropes, he shows, derives from the same Semitic root as the word Rephaim. So the Greeks knew who the Rephaim were. That was Heracles, and that was Perseus, and Cadmus, and Bellerophon, and so on and so on. That's who they were. And furthermore, he showed that the name of the Titans, who would be equated with the Watchers, these former gods who are now confined to the netherworld, that the name Titan derives from Amorite, another Semitic people group, their language similar to Hebrew. It derives from the name of an ancient Amorite tribe called the Tadanu, sometimes transliterated into English as the Ditanu. That blew my mind when I saw this. Like, wait a minute, you're telling me that the Titans derived their name from this ancient Amorite tribe, and apparently that word Tadanu is probably originates with an Akkadian word for bison or bull. There was a strain of cattle that was very numerous in the ancient Near East. In fact, around most of Europe and Asia as well, called the aurochs, Aurochs, aurochs. Huge. I mean, the bull stood like 6 foot, 2 meters at the shoulder. You would not want to encounter one of those without a really big tree to hide behind, because those things are massive. And yet, that was the word that was adopted as the name of this Amorite tribe, and apparently became the name of, and I've read that paper too, that's an excellent paper.
I know you have.
get
That's why I'm putting it on there.
this bovid imagery connected to the gods, the ancient gods of Sumer. When they're depicted in artwork, they all have horns. And as Nicholas Wyatt writes in a paper where he cites the work of Anus, the name Kronos, again, the leader of the Titans, derives from the Semitic word for horns, keren or karnu, Kronos, the horned one. So is this where we get the idea that the devil or demons have horns? This bovid imagery connected to, the bulls of Bashan. It's an image that continues through from Mesopotamia, at least through the Greek, through the Greek period until the early Christian period. So fascinating stuff when you start piecing all these things together, and you see that there's an awful lot of overlap between Mesopotamia and Canaan with the Greek world. So that Greek religion is essentially just a repackaged and rebranded form of the Canaanite religion, which shouldn't be surprising. There are some scholars out there who point out that the Hivites or Hivites of the Bible were Mycenaean Greeks. They were called Ahiyawa in the Luwian language, which is southern Anatolia, southern Turkey. And in Hebrew, they would have transliterated that as Hivite by dropping off the Ahiyawa. That's a technical term for a linguist. Yeah, it's called aphesis, where you drop off the first syllable. So you go from Ahiyawa to Hayawa to Hivite. And so you've got Greeks or Proto-Greeks in Canaan that Joshua and the Israelites did battle with.
Mm-hmm.
They were living in the vicinity of Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't surprise us when we start looking at Canaanite religion, seeing, okay, Baal, head of the pantheon, but he had to become king of the pantheon by overthrowing the king of the god of the dead, Mot, and the god of the sea, Yam. And we look at Greek religion, we see there's always this tension between Zeus and his brothers Poseidon, the sea god, and Hades, the god of the underworld. It's because they got their religion from the Amorites, the Canaanites.
Yeah.
And to me, that just like, wow. Because that's why I titled one of my books "Last Clash of the Titans."
Last Clash of the Titans, yeah.
Because that's who gets out of the abyss in Revelation 9.
I'm gonna put
the Titans.
there.
I wanted to, Derek. I think we don't want to take more of your time because I think we are passing your time limit. But as you mentioned, just like final questions, the Greeks, we think in Western modern culture that they seems to be like the rational exception to the barbarians around them, which is not really true. It's even in Plato and other philosophers, they talk about mysteries that they cannot write about this because you have to be initiated into those mysteries so we can talk about those topics. So despite the fact that the Greeks were obviously very advanced in math and science and philosophy, they were not separated from the rest of the cultures when it comes to contacting entities and doing initiation rituals and stuff like that. And Western culture is very much based on the Greco-Roman legacy.
Yes,
so a lot of our institutions and a lot of the things that we think they are very rational, they come from the Greeks, who were very influenced by those cultures in the East that were, into all those practices. I wanted to do since I'm writing my thesis, I use every opportunity in these interviews to ask scholars about the things related to my thesis. And I would like to ask you about the flood, because since I'm writing things related to stellar objects, and that's where very much connected to the calendar. And the weird thing about the Genesis is that the flood passages are those in which there is the greatest amount of calendar dates, which is very strange because you will expect that in Genesis 1 about the calendar, but no, in the flood is full of calendar passages. What do you think is that?
I think it points to some specific information. And there are many references in Scripture to numbers. And numbers that have symbolism, 3, 7, 10, 40, 100. The number 70, which was a number that represented all of them. So when we see, for example, the 70 sons of Ahab were killed after his death, it didn't mean that Ahab and Jezebel literally had 70 sons. It meant that all of them were killed. The same with Gideon after his son by the Canaanite concubine, Abimelech, leads a rebellion and kills the 70 sons of Gideon. Did Gideon literally have 70 sons? I don't think so, but what the story meant is that all of them were killed, except for the one son who then, condemned Abimelech and cursed him from a hill, shouting down at him a parable about a thistle that was, invited to become the king of the trees, or a thorn bush. But the number that was used at the end of Genesis 7 and the beginning of Genesis 8 to describe the length of time that the boat was on the water, I think is really fascinating because it points to something that we see in Revelation 9. And that's why I think that the entities coming out in Revelation 9 are the same that were being punished back in Genesis 7 and 8 during the flood, when their children were drowning in the flood of Noah. We're told that the ark was on the water 150 days. In Revelation 9, we're told that the entities that come out, led by the angel of the bottomless pit, Apollyon or Abaddon, get 5 months to torment humanity, those without the seal of God in their foreheads. In a lunar calendar, a 30-day lunar calendar, which is how time was marked in the ancient world. In fact, the Hebrew calendar today is still a 30-day calendar. 150 days is exactly 5 months. That's the only time we see that number appear in Scripture, in Genesis and in Revelation, because I believe it points to the same entities, the ones who provoked God to send the flood, the ones who get out at the end to take out their revenge on humanity, but only those that don't have the seal of God on their foreheads. And people in those days will long for death, but death will flee from them, which is really interesting because death is Thanatos, another entity in the Greek pantheon. Thanatos is the rider on the pale horse in Genesis or in Revelation 6. So Thanatos rides the earth, given power over a third of the earth, but then in Revelation 9, when people want to die, Thanatos flees from them. The transhumanists who are trying to overcome death by science, I don't think they ever will, but if they ever should, I think they'll regret it. It's like many things, be careful what you wish for because you might get it.
Yeah.
So, that's the number, the length of time, Matthias, I see in the story of Noah and the ark that I find fascinating is that 150 days.
The first time that I heard you both, you and Sharon talking about this, you the way you frame it is that it's like a revenge of what happened to the Nephilim in the flood. Derek, just before letting you go, because we want to, we can go forever, but
Yeah, it's true.
respect your time. But I just want to end on this note. I just want to say this up front. This is a platform for you. And not only you, but anyone who is willing to take the text seriously in their research. I mean, your work, what we're doing, as you said, as you put it previously, we are inspired in one way or other from what Heiser did in the past. So we are the product to continue not only his work, but Jesus Christ's work, which is the most important thing of all. So I just want to ask you this. You've been, along the way in your research, you both, I remember so distinctively listening to you to talk about CERN, the black cube, and what is going on there, because they seem to be, what's the word here? They like there is some sort of like a trading, they're getting something from somewhere as an exchange, because it is likely they make contact with something which is, behind the other side. And, if we can put it that way, behind the veil. What is going on there? Because you connected this with Saturn, at some point. And, I love movies, and I couldn't help but remembering the cube in Transformers. In Transformers, they are aliens coming from the outer space. So I can see, I'm like you. We're connecting dots. We're seeing everywhere. So please tell us, just to come to an end on that note. And I understand this is going to pique our interest even more, but I just want to hear from you the most updated views on that.
Well, there are others who've done more work on CERN than I have, because I'm of the belief that whatever they may be trying to contact, and there are those who believe that CERN is attempting to unlock the
Mm,
bottomless pit and let those things
yes.
out. But the Bible tells us that it won't happen until God sends an angel with the key. So we don't have to worry about that until such time as God says, okay, we're 5 months from whatever, and allows the angel with the key to the bottomless pit to come down from heaven. And I personally think that, and Sharon and I agree on this, that the church won't be here when that happens, that we will be called out of here before that day. So whatever they're trying to do at CERN, yes, they are trying to look into other dimensions and try to see if there's anything in there, make contact with things. But I don't think God is going to allow anything outside this dimension to enter our dimension without his permission. So I don't think we need to be too worried about that. If anything, just feel sorry for the guys who are spending so much time, money, and effort to try to unlock that gate, because it's not going to unlock until God allows it. And yeah, the cube is a symbol. I think the cube that we need to look at is the cube in Mecca, the Kaaba. That's why I wrote the book Bad Moon Rising. And if I had to redo that book today, the one change I would make is that in that book I speculated that Allah was not an actual entity, that he was a sort of a simulacrum, like a Wizard of Oz type projection by the gods of Mesopotamia, who were taken off guard, taken by surprise when Jesus resurrected. It's like, he was fully human. How is he coming back from the dead? Surprise. That was Jesus' mission. Well, as a response, the gods of Mesopotamia, Baal and Astarte, Ishtar, they got together and created this new religion dedicated to the shedding of blood. And in fact, it's on track, Islam is, to become the world's largest religion within the next 50 years, just based on demographic projections. Muslims are having babies. We Christians are not so much. And a lot of our children and grandchildren are falling away from the faith. So right now, about 2.3 billion Christians on earth, about 2 billion Muslims, and the 1 and 2 positions will change if the Lord tarries within the next 50 years. I think the Lord's going to be here before that, but we'll see. I don't set dates, never set dates. The Lord will come when it's time.
Neither do I.
If I had to make a change today, it would be that the entity Shemiyaza, Molech, Saturn, Kronos, El, Enlil, Dagon, Ashur, I think that is Allah. So that would be the one change I would make. That this entity, who was so threatening and so powerful, that after the Genesis 6 rebellion, God locked him and his colleagues up in the bottomless pit in chains. And again, that's biblical. 2 Peter 2, verse 4. God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but thrust them down to, and the word in Greek is Tartarosis, not Hades. These entities are in the bottomless pit until Revelation 9, and that opens up when the angel comes down with a key. Satan is still roaming around. So does this mean Shemiyaza and Azazel and these other fallen watchers, they're more dangerous than Satan? I mean, that's almost, some people would hear that and say, that's heretical, because it's a new paradigm. But the Bible tells us these angels are locked up in the abyss, and Satan is still roaming around seeking whom he may devour. So why is that? Again, I think that's the entity that Muslims serve. And it's actually tragic, because there are a lot of people who are in that deception. And sadly, the ones who are most fanatical about following the teachings of Muhammad are causing a lot of pain, death, and suffering in this world, and have been since the year 632 AD when the armies of Islam decided to come out of Arabia and start attacking the rest of the world. But that's where we are in the 21st century. I think that we're getting close to the end.
Yeah.
I also always speaking in plural, which is very weird. For always us, we, even though it's supposed to be the unicity of Allah, it's fundamental to Islam, but for some reason it always speaks in plural, which is strange.
The royal we, perhaps.
All right. I think that's a good point to come to an end. If you want to add any last comment.
If I have to add something, because if for some reason one of my professors in astronomy, they see this video, which I don't think they will, but for some reason they see this, I actually think that the guys at CERN are just more busy trying to consume public funds, because I think particle physics is going to a point, a stumbling block, a point in which they just cannot go any further and just trying to keep spending funding. So I actually think that they are looking for the extra dimensions are not extended dimensions, are dimensions that are in the subatomic level. So it's not something to open a portal.
Quantum level, yeah.
It's different, because there is a difference between extended dimensions and dimensions that are like screw. And I think the guys on CERN are actually the Higgs bosons was actually a very, very, very good discovery, but I'm not really sure if they can find something new after that. So anyway.
I always think it's interesting. They always refer to it as the so-called God particle, but the actual expression by the guy who found it was the God blank particle.
Because it's extremely difficult to detect.
Right.
So it says actually it was a journalist who said, "Oh, it's a particle of God." No, it's because it's really hard to detect.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
the media took it, ran with it in a different direction, and people misunderstood. Yeah.
I remember Josh Beck addressing those topics on Skywatch TV.
Yeah.
Shout out to him. I hope his wife and his son is doing just well. Derek, this has been awesome. Thank you. I mean, I love to connect with people that have connected with my Heiser and his work. I personally have fond memories of you and Skywatch TV.
Thank you.
The family, Skywatch TV, Dr. Thomas Horn, all of the people there, because that was the beginning of my journey, and that's why I cherish so much that interview that I have it here on my computer. And when I'm when I'm a little like nostalgic, I went back and rewatched that. It's just fulfilling and emotional, touching, because Mike is no longer with us, at least not physically, but in the spirit. But it's enormous privilege for me, and I'm pretty sure for Matthias, to connect with you. And we thank you, God, that you are still alive, that we can talk to you, though digitally. But that's great. That's awesome. So I just want to say thank you.
No, the honor is mine. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is a tribute for him and his ministry, his work. And I'm pretty sure that Mike's work continues and legacy is more alive than ever. And Amen. We pray, God, that many people still can be reached and find a purpose through his content and be of tremendous transformative power for their lives. Because we human beings, we go through a lot of hardships. And I personally believe, and I'm pretty sure you both as well, there's no greater power than the one that lies in us, which is Almighty God. So with that in mind, to everybody watching this episode, thank you. Please keep us in touch in there. Give us a like, subscribe, support our work. Also, this is a collaboration with Derek, so you can go and check out Derek Gilbert's content. The Iron Myth, they do. I think it's every Sunday, Derek, that you guys?
We do it every month, once a month.
Okay. Yeah. And so you can go there and check out their content. So with that in mind, Until next time, take care. Bye now.